thank you very much to Bank of Lithuania for having invited me and the ESRB Secretariat. Thank you to John for a very broad and fascinating introduction on all questions which are confronting policymakers. And what I'm trying to do today is really to stick to the question as much as possible. Of course, taking account of also to a certain extent some of the broad issues which have been mentioned. The question which we have is macroprudential policy reacts to changes in housing prices and also affect them. So why not make housing prices growth rates a macroprudential policy target? This is the question which has been asked to us. And reflecting on this, of course, we have been certainly finding out that prices are important. They are a driver to indebtedness. So we will try to show what has been the attention which we have been given to prices in our recent policy considerations at the ESRB, which has led to the issuance of height warnings to member states on real estate, notably to residential real estate. But of course, we also know that they are not the only factor which we have been looking at. We have been looking a lot at financial exposures, direct and indirect financial exposures. Of course, we are also clear that prices are difficult to target directly with measures. So what we have been trying to do is to take a holistic view, coming to the conclusion that prices matters, certainly, but equally important are banks' exposures and the indebtedness of the households. Now, what I'm trying to show to you are exactly the graphs on which we have been working when we started to try to identify what problems existed in the real estate sector in terms of vulnerabilities, and also to identify the countries which should have been at the center, at the focus of our attention. Now, if you see on the left-hand side, it's absolutely clear that there has been an increase in residential real estate also in the last 3 years. The bars in red are for the countries which finally got a warning for the ESRB. The countries in blue are those which didn't get a warning. You will see that there is you don't simply have all countries in red on the left, because the very end of the assessment which we have been trying to make is whether policies which were already established, whether they were appropriate and sufficient to address the vulnerabilities. So we have been trying to look forward and see whether action taken by the authorities was already promising enough, or whether there was the need to warn them about the need to take action. So certainly you can see, for example, in cases like in Sweden, that you had in the last 3 years a price increase of around 35%, and what you see marked in yellow also tells you that there was a noticeable increase compared to the level of 2008. So the price was high, was increasing, was historically high compared to what was the pre-crisis situation, and there was also a flow aspect of inflation going on. And if you look on the right-hand side, you see what is the price compared to the capacity of the income of a household, so changes of house price compared to income ratio. And once again, you can see that there were cases where there's been a noticeable increase of price levels. However, this was by itself not sufficient, so we wanted to have a look also at other aspects like lending and indebtedness. In terms of lending, what we found is that in some of the cases where prices were increasing, this was accompanied by an important change in terms of broader loan generation, by the way, largely by banks, but today we can say that it's not only banks. In some cases, like for example, the Netherlands, you have also very strong activity from investment funds and insurance. So once again, you can see a strong lending activity in some countries. Slovakia, for example, is one of the countries where you have a 45% increase in lending in the last 3 years. And on the right-hand side, what you can see is a situation in which the borrowing has been, from the side of households, has also been very strong. And you may find yourself in a situation where the total liability of the households are very high compared to the total source of income. Another issue to which we have been giving attention is the importance of the residential real estate sector to the economy. So what you see is you may have situations in which credit to house is very large compared to the nominal GDP of a country. You see, for example, that in the case of Denmark is equals the GDP of the country. And on the right-hand side, you can see that it is also very large compared to the capital of the bank, the capacity of the banks to absorb losses, with situations where the activity of lending to for house purchases may be 7 times larger than available capital. Trying to bring all this information together has led us to an attempt not so much to look at the legacy issues, not so much to say what was in the past, but an attempt, maybe in the terms you were saying, an activist attempt, to try to see whether the measures which were taken by the authorities had, at least in potential terms, a capacity to address the questions which we were identifying. And basically, this has led us to identify first 11 countries where we thought the combination of the vulnerabilities was a problem, and then to identify 8 of them for which we thought that measures taken were not sufficient. The methodology which we have been identifying and which has been designed by a group led by Francesco Zollino, who is somewhere in the public. I met him before when we were taking a cup of coffee together. This methodology was basically based on identifying three lines of defense and 3 aspects to which we should have been looking at. One was the vulnerability of the households. We have been calling household stretch. So this is, and by the way, we found to a large extent that this was one of the weaknesses of today's financial sector and today's economy, the over-indebtment factor. Then we have been looking at the collateral stretch, which is very much linked to prices, which is basically trying to identify whether the price of collateral is in line or not with what you could identify as a possible fundamental price. And then the banking stretch, which is basically the capacity of the banks to absorb losses would risks materialize. The conclusion of the votes which we had, because at the very end you vote, and the very end, so it is a judgment which you do on the basis of the information which you have, as brought us to identify a number of countries and to issue a number of warnings. Now, what can be interesting to see is that there has been action which has been taken by some of them. And I would like to identify some some cases. These are measures, by the way, which have been taken very recently. We are discussing them in the ESRB framework, simply to see how much they are, so to speak, able to close the gap which we have identified between vulnerability and the efficiency of the policy action. So, for example, the Central Bank of Slovakia quite recently has adopted a decree which is trying to limit the level of indebtedness to income, the activity of lending to the value of the collateral, and also the maturity for housing loans, tightening all these factors. These actions have been motivated with a situation of excessive indebtedness plus unsustainable or, to a certain extent, excessive credit growth. In this case, prices have not been the main concern, but of course are one of the indicators which authorities are looking at. To the contrary, prices have been important in the decisions which have been taken in Denmark, and Thomas was referring to it exactly in his introductory words. By the way, the measures in Denmark are particularly interesting because they are one case of so-called macroprudential policy by postcode, in the sense that there is an identification of areas where, and by the way, if you were going to commercial real estate, it would be even a stronger trend. In residential real estate, you have a problem of dynamics which are very local, are focused and concentrated in a large urban center. They are part of one overall trend of re-urbanization of our society. And in fact, the measures which have been just recently taken by Denmark are focusing two centers: Copenhagen, the capital, and Aarhus, which is the second town, and also chirurgically with an attempt to look at risky loans to see what are the loans where debt to income is above 400%, and try to if you want to caution against an increase of these specific contracts. And here, indeed, the motivation is price growth, and so price growth is one aspect which is important. And then finally, something on Norway. By the way, the colleagues from Norway are here, so they will explain better than I can do. There has been measures also there. So in Europe, there is an active macroprudential policy which is being enacted. It concerns both LTV limits, amortization requirements, and also requires a sensitivity test. And also here, the problems are credit growth, indebtedness. The measure is basically also linked to the activity of the financial supervisor. So, summing up, if you want, we do not have an answer to all the theoretical issues which John has been identified. A theory of macroprudential policy will not be written by this generation, but this generation is trying its best to use the instruments we have and to make a responsible use of them. Thank you very much.